If you think you might be feeling depressed, stressed, anxious, or overwhelmed, BetterHelp, the sponsor of this episode, is here for you. BetterHelp offers a broad range of over 20,000 licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you. Plus, you can get 10% off your first month with my code, betterhelp.com/Kohler. With BetterHelp, you can talk to your therapist in a private online environment at your convenience, and all you have to do is fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs before getting matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Then you schedule secure video and phone sessions, plus you can exchange unlimited messages and everything you share is completely confidential. As a mom constantly working around Jaden's toddler schedule, having my weekly therapy online has been a complete game changer and a huge reason why I have made big steps to better my mental health for myself and for my family. You can also request a new therapist anytime at no additional charge. Join the 2 million plus people who have taken charge of their mental health with an experienced BetterHelp therapist. Don't forget to use my code to get that 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Kohler. That's better, HELP.com/Kohler. Hello and welcome to Kohler Commentary. Today I am joined by my sister, Jessica Chi, aka my 언니, who joins me from New York, but she's here in Texas visiting me for the millionth time as she cares for my sons and myself on her teacher break that is very precious. So thank you so much for coming here today, 언니.
It's my pleasure. Good to be here.
As we kicked off 2024 and just kind of established its year's transitions, I thought it would be cool to also have an episode on transitions and what that looks like as my relationship also with my sister. And so I'd love to kind of start it off with another quote in The Way Forward. That was the book that was inspired by my sister as well. Wow, so many nuggets here. Are you ready?
Yes. It is only heavy because you are deciding over and over again to carry it. Embrace change. Loosen up your sense of identity. Let yourself walk a new path. You do not have to ignore or erase the past. You just have to wholeheartedly embrace the present and move on.
I chose this page actually also because of the word identity. And for you who's an Enneagram 3 and for myself who's a 2, we belong to the heart triad. Now, do you remember this from the times that I was your coach last year?
I do, but for your listeners, maybe you can kind of summarize or recap what that means.
Maybe I'll recap after I hear. So there are 3 centers of intelligence, and those 3 triads kind of allow the Enneagram to be put into trios. And so there's the head triad, the gut triad, and the heart triad. And without speaking too much about it, because I do want to focus more so on just the identity portion for today, the heart triad is the feeling center. So our initial response or reaction to things is with our feelings. And with that, there is an emotion struggle with shame or sadness if shame seems too harsh for you. And there is a desire for a significant identity. And so for us, I think I realize like a way we relate a lot is because we do hope to kind of create or like leave our mark in different ways. And so I wanted to talk about this with you because I think we have both been grappling with what this page might mean in our own personal lives. But before we talk on that, I wanted to also ask how this might have affected our relationship as sisters.
I think we talked about this a little bit before about how change has affected us differently. And I think when I was younger, I grew up thinking that, or not just thinking, but just feeling identities or situations would just feel comfortable, or I didn't realize how comfortable it felt until things started to change. I started to move, friendships, relationships started to change as we got older. And I realized that change is part of life. It's natural, but that I didn't really like it at first, that I didn't understand why things had to change. I think a lot of it maybe was because I felt like I was the same and that people around me were changing. And now that I kind of reflect on that first era of changing that was happening, I think that also came with this idea that if I changed, or if things are changing, or if I wanted to change, that meant my past self or identity or circumstances were wrong, or that they were not good enough, or that change meant it was just, it is a better place or a different place, right? But that meant that I had to accept that something had been wrong before for something to change. So that idea. So I think change was like a hard concept for me. At first, a lot of it was with relationships, right? With mostly friendships. I think like when I was younger, I was like, oh, these are going to be my best friends for life. Or I think my relationship with this person is always going to be like this, like really, really strong and really close in these different ways. And then the older I got, everyone's lives move in different ways. And so I soon realized I also had to shift my understanding of our relationships. The biggest change was my relationship with you. Because I think I always thought my relationship with you would be like the closest, and not that it's not now, but like in the same ways, in the same exact ways, right? And I think it went through stages of transition when you married Matt. And I had to accept that I was no longer your best friend. And I shouldn't be.
This is exactly what I wanted to talk about.
And that it shouldn't be. And it's right that it wasn't, or that it isn't. And then I think the moment I kind of was feeling, okay, I'm okay with it, and I've accepted it for what it is. And then Jaden came along. And like the priorities in your life shifted, not even 360, like 720, even more.
That's true.
And I think with Matt, it was a little bit of a jealous thing, because I was like, oh, okay, fine, I will let Matt have Eunji. But then when Jaden came and when kids came, it was different, because it wasn't even just about like the time that they were taking, but it was about how I saw you change as a person, and how that kind of changed how I reacted and how I was supposed to be there for you. So I did change my kind of posture and how I wanted to be of help when I visited, or like what my visits started to mean, or what our travels started to mean.
Right.
I think before it was a lot of it like, what can I also get from Eunji, and like, like it's our thing, versus I think it became a lot more of, oh, she needs this right now, and I can give that to her. And so it was more of that, like a difference. And I think since then also transitioned to a different place now too, where I think you're more comfortable in motherhood and even in your identity as it shifts. So I think that's an interesting idea of transitioning too, when different people are changing in their own identities, right? And how that affects the relationships that you guys have, because of how it affects that dynamic.
Right. Wow. I feel like you hit the nail on the bridge. Do you know this term? No? Like you hit it on the mark.
You hit the nail on the head?
I don't know. But I think because I think this kind of what you shared, right? And with identity and shame, this is something I had struggled with, because for a two who friendships, relationships mean so much, and you absolutely held the sole title of best friendship, right? And almost there was this guilt, because by marriage, and I guess what we learn, like your husband is supposed to take that role, and there was a guilt or like a sadness, a grieving as well, because while suddenly I gave this role to my husband, it didn't look the same as the role I had with you for so many years. And so I think we still managed to keep that, like you said, pre-kids, because we had our at least annual trips together and got to have that quality time. But once Jaden came along, there was this like, wow, I can't have that quality time with Onni. And then as you guys started to, you and also the other people of our family, but you for all your breaks, and sometimes your breaks are for the summer as well, like you kind of give everything to be here, and not just be here, but help me rest or help me kind of do those things. And then in my head, I was like, I have nothing to give. And so I am curious, like in this role where before it did feel a little mutual, our relationship, and then now it became like, you were giving more in a tangible way. And in that role reversal, I accumulated a lot of guilt. or like wishing that I could do more, but I can't. Did you ever not build resentment? Because I don't think you did that, but just because of the way things shifted, what emotions did that create for you?
I don't think I ever felt resentment. I think I felt a lot of sadness at first. So that idea of like grieving, right? Grieving, not a lost relationship because the relationship is there, still there, but a grieving in a season of a relationship being over.
Yeah.
Right?
Oof,
and I
so
think,
deep, Nini.
and I think a few years ago, I like kind of held on to that grief. And that's why that quote, it's only heavy because you're deciding to carry it over and over again. I think because maybe the past season was so great or so wonderful or whatever that relationship or that time was so good, like you hold on to it, right? And the more you hold on to it, I think the more sadness or grief that you might feel when it's over. But now that I look at it from where I am now to see like what my visits look like, and yeah, it looks like me kind of spending all my time here and, you know, cleaning and like doing all these things here, but I love it. You know, like
I don't know about that.
but I wouldn't like trade that new kind of season of relationship because it's not just with you now, right? It's like exponential with my relationship with Jaden and Evan and Matt and like this new place, right? And what that new season has brought. And so I think, yeah, it doesn't come with resentment, but new feelings, but only if you kind of let go of those old times and move into, like lean into what that new season brings.
When do you feel like you started leaning in?
Oh, I think I started leaning into it more when you were also more comfortable in your identity and in your place. Because I think I like fed a lot into how you were feeling and what you needed and what I felt like it meant for you. And when you, I think, felt more comfort in that, I also did too. And I felt like it wasn't just of me kind of giving in that moment, but it was more of like now it's like back to being a mutual time.
I guess one last question I have on this past several years is in that, you know, whether it would be defined as postpartum or with my adjustment disorder or whatnot, you know, I had a season of heavy depression. And right now, I think I am better with different things I'm putting into place. But as my sister and a best friend of mine as well, like, how was that for you? And I think like in general for people that might be listening, you know, what does it look like for loved ones to see someone struggle in that way? Just because I think you were someone I shared, not everything, because I was like, I don't want to hurt your feelings or something either. But I don't know. I would be curious to know, is that what you mean by like the identity part or my identity part?
I think part of it, I feel like I am a very like empathetic person, or I want to be, right? And so my number one thing when people are going through things or feeling different things is I try to understand what they're going through and where they're coming from and what those feelings might feel like. And I think the hardest thing was that I thought that I always understood everything you felt. Right? Because we grew up in the same home. We had, you know, different experiences, but, you know, it's one of those like, oh, you get what I'm trying to say without even saying anything kind of feelings, you know?
And we also had like similar professions, or I had a dabble into your profession. So I could understand.
So even that kind of that connection, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of unsaid things, whether it is because we are sisters or because we had similar experiences, that I feel like I didn't have to explain myself, or you didn't have to explain yourself when we kind of just understood. I think, but that was one of the first things that I felt like, no matter how hard I try to understand, like I can understand in a way of logically trying to understand and try and figure it out. But in my own experience, have I ever felt or thought anything that you were sharing? I hadn't. Right.
Oh,
so,
what's that like to just kind of allow your emotions not to get to them?
I think that's a story for another podcast. But that made me feel actually a lot of guilt in a way that I felt like I wasn't being what you needed in whatever moment or the way that you needed it. And I felt like as hard as I was trying to wrap my brain around how to say the right things, how to do the right things, or like what, I don't know. I thought that I just was failing. And over the past few years of kind of seeing you go through that and seeing whether, what I did worked or didn't work, or it's not even about working, right? About whether, how it fell on you, right? I think it wasn't even really about that I'm learning now too. And I think that was part of my visits, right? I don't think I ever knew what it was that I needed to be or say or do, but it was being here, being in that moment. Are you crying, Eunjoy? Even just to see you go through it, like see you in those breakdowns and see you, because from being far away, I don't see a lot of those things. And being able to kind of like feel the tensions sometimes of being here in those moments and the discomfort was actually good. That actually helped me understand you and the moments a little bit deeper in ways that I probably couldn't have.
Well, just to affirm you, I did feel like you did what you could wrap around to be the right thing for someone in this situation, just in the sense of being present and spending time with me, especially because at that time, whether it was my marriage or family circumstances here, I was lonely. So when you did come, that really helped. But also just giving me that space or that presence to remind me of something that's bigger than just that moment I was maybe going through, And even if I even shared a conflict with you, like, I don't know, the car ride to the airport one time, if you remember, right? But like, you let me share that, and then you kind of like responded with love in those ways. And so I think that really helped me know that even when it got really scary, maybe within myself, I knew that there was someone that not just loved me, but loved me as they knew all the yuckiness I was going through. So thank you, Nini.
You're welcome.
But I'm curious. So for me, as your younger sister who has always kind of had the role of sharing all my feelings, especially as a 2 with the emotions, you in the feeling center of the heart triad does not really share. During these last few years, as our relationship was changing just through natural course of things, and with the pandemic and your profession and how stressful that was for you just personally, did you ever feel like you couldn't share with me like what you were going through as 1 an Enneagram 3 and 2 as my older sister, because of all the stuff I was going through? And would you have advice of how you would unload that elsewhere, or how you would change that in terms of what you would have done differently with our relationship, knowing that I would have wanted to be there for you? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, great.
Next question. No,
All
I'm
right,
just kidding. No, because even though I knew you were going through your own things, I knew that you were always there to listen to my things too. You're probably one of the only people that I know can understand what I'm feeling or thinking without having to really explain myself too much. So if anything, during those times, you probably heard my thoughts the most.
Speaking of, since last podcast launched, I am trying to just pull one page from the 2 books that I had shared. The Way Forward, which we kind of talked about as our topic of today, and 생각소스, which is another book that you gave me. And so on page 80, so this is actually your copy. The Way Forward, you bought me, Oppa, and Appa, all copies. But on page, as I was like reading through these and thinking through different prompts, if you can remember, this is a book that gives you kind of like thought prompts in Korean language for you to think through. And so I'm going to ask you this question where then you can translate, or I can translate, and then you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. 온전히 신뢰할 수 있는 사람이 있나요? Is there someone you can be like faultless? Is there someone you can be totally yourself with? 온전히, I don't know 온전히, but 실례 is like 실례 is like
just.
sorry, right? Like, oh, I'm sorry, 실례해요. So it's like saying you don't have to be 실례해요. And then 사람 is
Are you
person.
going to put this all in?
Yeah. So, can I ask you, 온전히 신뢰할 수 있는 사람이 있나요?
I'm not going to correct all of what you just said right now, but I'm leaning into new identities of myself where I don't always have to be right. But I feel like I already answered this question.
Yeah. I
So
just
why
want
are
to
you
write.
Because you have to bring in a prompt from this book.
Yeah. And actually, I read the word 은지 on this
은전이?
page. No, 은지. You wrote 은지 on here.
Oh, I wrote it.
You didn't write. You wrote on like maybe 1 or 2 pages, and some of the other pages are a little too long, so I haven't fully read it yet. But I was reading through it. I was like, oh, 은지, that's me. Oh, you didn't know? That's why I brought it up. So just to like affirm what you just said.
So you're just like affirming yourself?
Myself.
Okay.
Yes. And also asking my audience, is there someone you can be fully yourself with, right? And even if pride could get in the way or feeling sorry for that person, you know, like, oh, I don't want to burden that person because they might be struggling. Like, don't distance yourself from them because they value you probably just as much. And I feel like, you know, even though outwardly I definitely had like a tangible looking like transitions, you know, like I think you being present and also unloading the best you can when you needed to is what also kept our sisterhood relationship going.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of times when, like, I think this a lot too, where, oh, my pain or my struggle is not as bad as theirs, right? Or like what I'm going through, like people have it way worse, right? And there are a lot of times where, like, I've thought that with you too. You know, there's a lot of times when I'm tired, but there's like no way I'm as tired as Eunji is right now with like her kids and her, you know, like all that she has. But I don't think that thought has ever kept me from like ever.
신뢰하는 거.
Yes, that. Just hiding parts of myself because of that. Because even though that is also true, right? That even in that, you would still want to know, right? Because I trusted that.
And I would
you
like
still
to say
cared.
you are also, if not more tired.
No, but you know,
Yes,
like
yes.
I trusted in that relationship already.
Yeah.
But that's also your two-ness, you know. Not everyone might have a sister who is a strong two.
That is true.
Yeah.
You're right. I'm curious.
Right? Like the different sister
Why don't
dynamics.
you, what are the different sister dynamics out
based
there?
on your Enneagrams.
And would you want to come on the pod and share your dynamic? And
Come on.
come on. So taking a step outside of our sister relationship, but the page I just shared on the way forward, is there any other way that this might speak to you in a more broad way?
So like transitions in identity.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think I mentioned it earlier, but and something that I've been going through or thinking about is how you can let go of past identities, or how identities can change, how they can evolve, how they can be different in different seasons of your life, and how sometimes identities or labels that you were given in the past can actually be not crippling, but kind of keep you in a box or keep you from doing or being or different ways or different things. I am leaning into that like new, what are some things I want to let go of, not just things like parts of my life, but identities that I want to let go of or that I don't want to hold on to so tightly anymore, that I want to loosen my grip on so that I give space for new parts of myself to be, to grow, to look different in where I am in my life right now.
Anything you want to sneak peek on here?
I mean, I know like we were talking about like older sisters, right? And like that identity, I think growing up with certain expectations of how to be, right? And I think that there are connections with my Enneagram, with being a 3, like the need to be perfect or right all the time or having it all together, being organized, being very type A, planner, all of those things. And there's a lot of that I love and that I don't want to, let go of, that I think are me and that I do want to hold on to. But there's a lot of that actually kept me from doing other things, I think, or thinking in new ways that I think in this time or season of my life, I need to be. Like more spontaneous. Like I don't have to have it all together. I can be wrong and I need to...
What?
Yes. But this like posture of growing, that like everything that you did before can still be right and good, and you can still grow and move on and change and be different.
Wow.
So we're reading the book Atomic Habits together with our siblings. And there was this one section that, we haven't read the whole book yet, but this one section that stood out to me when I was thinking about this podcast too, about identity. And it said, when you have repeated a story to yourself for years, it is easy to slide into these mental grooves and accept them as fact. In time, you begin to resist certain actions because that's not who I am. There is internal pressure to maintain your self-image and behave in a way that is consistent with your beliefs. And you find whatever way you can to avoid contradicting yourself. So like one...
Like I'm messy.
Yeah, something like that.
And I tell myself that so I stay messy.
So even just small things like I have bad memory.
Yes, you do.
Right?
But you don't.
And
No, sorry, you don't.
I have bad memory, but because of that, I think I use that as an excuse for a lot of things, right? Whereas if I told myself, no, I want to be a person who does not have bad memory, right? I would build kind of habits. And that's what the book is about. Changing or thinking differently about your identity or your belief system or your values in order for that to change the habits of your life. So then if I believed that I didn't have a bad memory, or if I wanted to not, then I would act differently. What I would do day to day would change, knowing that that's who I am or that's who I want to be. And so I think that's a powerful way to think. My pastor actually preached on a sermon about this a few weeks ago too, about thinking about your future self, right? Living in your future self as your hope for how you want to be. That a lot of people make choices and decisions based off of mistakes that they made in their past. But instead, God calls us to think of like what we envision ourselves to be, and to live in that, to manifest that, and how much more powerful that would be. And how would we steward our time and our resources in order for that to become. So the bad memory identity thing would be kind of a more superficial identity part, but it did make me think about my teacher identity a lot, and how like lately I've been thinking about myself as a teacher and what that meant for me to build my identity as a teacher so strongly from the beginning of my career and when I was younger, how that affected how I built my life, right? And how like the habits that came about because of how strongly I held on to that identity. I don't think that identity is wrong, but I do think it has evolved in a lot of ways since then, and what it means for me to move on from that and to see how that might look differently in my life when it's not so tied to your job. Right. And so the idea of how identity and your profession are also tied, and what that like relationship looks like can change too, from when you first begin to 10 years later. Right, to 10 years later after that too, or 20 or 30. And I don't think that's something that I thought about when I was younger. When I first started working, I was just like, oh, I'm a teacher. I'm just going to be a teacher for the rest of my life. And that's who I am. And that's my passion. And that's what God called for me to be and do. I think 10 years later, I began to think differently. I think that shook me a lot. But I was like, oh, I can't change though. Because that's who I am. And that's who I was called to be. And if I change, then that makes what I did for the past 10 years wrong.
Which is not.
It makes it not what it was supposed to be. But I think this past few months of kind of just leaning into new seasons and transition in whether it's job or parts of myself, it's important to remember that none of what you've done or what you were or what you did were wrong.
Yeah.
Right? That idea.
Yeah.
It is still who you are, and it will feed into and is leading to whatever is next.
Mm-hmm. I think it's always encouraging that someone older than me is very open about change, and like wants to work towards that because, as we get older, we become more fixed or like, you younger ones don't know, we've lived, and I think what nakte? Yeah.
No, it's called like
Fish.
Latte.
Latte. Coffee. You want to explain
It's a
it?
Korean joke, but
Latte.
let's move on.
Okay. And so I think it's always helpful for me as a younger sister to have someone older than me that does take on that growth mindset. And as sisters to each other and people who are 신뢰 없는 people to each other, like what are some things we would want to encourage the other, in this next year or in this next season? And for me, one of that was hoping that you would give yourself more, whether it's, I don't know if I have the right words for it, but like in this season, for you to be able to have that grace on yourself, knowing you did so much in this field. And if you want to continue, I would always support that. But also like, if not, I would support that too. And I don't know, just wanting to make sure you have grace on that part of yourself. That's one thing for me.
Thank you. I mean, I would say the same thing for you.
Okay, grace on
in
myself.
terms of all the things, because you're harder on yourself than I am on myself. But I think there were certain times when I thought it was really hopeless for you.
I thought that too. Yeah.
And I have not even experienced the deepness of the feelings that probably you felt, right? Mm-hmm. And yet you overcame it. And when I see that, I think, oh, you can do it. That's so cheesy, huh? Oh, because there was times when I was like, oh my gosh, she's not going to make it through. Not that she's not, but I was like, oh wow, it's going to be really hard. Mm-hmm. And you did. And it wasn't like an immediate like night after kind of like, wow, she overcame this one night and it all changed. After like months, I was like, oh yeah, she's doing better and she's doing good. And there was so much that you did right into that whatever situation you were in, but I don't know.
Keep hyping me up.
But I guess that speaks to how much stronger you are than you think. And then also, and I think this a lot too when I go through things, how much God loves you. There are times in my life when like things happen and not even really hard things, but I'm like, wow. I think God must really love me for him to like redeem me in these ways, right? Yeah. And when I see your life and, your testimonies and your stories too, I see that, right? And I think that is always like the best hope to hold on to. God must really love you to pull you out of it and to always like keep holding on to you.
Yeah.
The end.
And I think for me, one thing when you were saying that was like, whether it's sometimes when like I had this crazy fight with Matt and like my emotions just went like, the word is like bash cray, like, wasn't that like a song or something? Like bash cray, At the end of it, then I'm like over it. And then I'm a little embarrassed that like I just went red on someone, that maybe I don't feel always that comfortable showing that emotion side just because Matt's so like calm all the time in that sense. But yeah, I think like now that I am definitely better than I was a year ago, there are parts of me that like whoever it is that I did share this with, which wasn't many, but like I did share. There's a part of me that almost even feels guilty, like, oh, I'm better now. Do they think I was lying? But like it was such a hard time. So I think hearing that, like, you know, if I were to share with loved ones, you know, I think that's better than not. So if someone is struggling, it's always better to share with your like lifeline people, and knowing that you, for me, like, you are always cheering me on. And even in this time where I am like happy, I still have struggles, but it's like a overall upward hill that I'm moving towards. Rather than even me feeling guilty or like a little ashamed, whether it's my triad or like in general, like that I hope she doesn't think, or I hope whoever doesn't think I was exaggerating. Like I was really in the pits of it. But knowing that that's what these people are for, that's what you're for, is like to be that support in those dark times and celebrate in like the lighter times, and vice versa if in the future that were to happen or not.
But I also think that when you have like 온전히 신뢰할 수 있는 사람, when you have that person, you don't even have to question that.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to question proving your circumstance, how bad it is, or like justify, oh, well, I'm feeling really good right now. But remember, before I was really struggling, you know, like when it is with that person, you don't have to even justify those feelings or that. One, because they know. And then two, those people would want to celebrate in those moments. And when you share the good moments with somebody that 온전히 신뢰할 수 있는 사람.
Are you just bragging now?
No, I'm referring back to the quote that you brought up.
I know.
When you do, then they would only want those good moments for you.
Yeah, no, that's true. Maybe that's even like the quote of like what we tell ourselves. Like, I don't know where I started telling myself that, but it's not that you ever put that thought in my mind, but to reaffirm for those 온전히 신뢰하는 사람들 that this is where that safe space is. Oh, it's basically safe space? Is that kind of it or no?
Kind of. Actually, that makes me think of not the identity of shame or what was the
heart triad?
The heart triad. I do think that coupled with like that Korean mentality of sacrifice, right? And that living a hard life is honorable.
Yeah.
Right? I think that identity too is definitely like existing in us, because I've also felt that too, right? Like when I go through something hard, I'm like, oh, I should live I should, like, it's okay. I should struggle. I should, like if I have it so easy, I'm doing something wrong. What am I going to be proud of overcoming if I'm just living this easy life, right? Like there should be some challenge or heartache or hardship in my life to be able to like speak as evidence to the things that I've gone through.
Right.
Right. And I think
that's an unlearning thing.
That is. There's a lot of like immigrant identity within that too, that comes from our parents' generation and, what they've also, I don't think like purposely like put into us, but what we've seen and what we've grown up with too. And that is something that I don't want to completely ignore. I do want to honor that idea that is important, but also I kind of want to cut that. You don't have to suffer and sacrifice in order to live an important, meaningful, genuine, good life. I think that's something that maybe our generation is trying to towards, like,
Oh, thanks for tying it back to Korean American community. What are like your top 3 memories of each other?
3?
Oh, just one?
I don't know if I can like narrow it down to 3, but I think my top moments or memories always happen during our trips together. So when we went on trips together, I think
Banggu.
especially when we've always like lived never in the same city, so we've had to meet up at trips. And then now that I've seen you so much in your like daily life in Dallas, I look back on the trips of what it means to see you not kind of do the daily grind, and it's always on like trips together, I think, are the top memories.
That's true.
So like when we're eating 새우깡
and the gondola,
it's like
and
Korea,
then
and then I don't know.
A lot of these trips though have me getting indigestion.
You did always get indigestion. When you fell.
Oh yeah, at Banff.
Yeah, like in the river.
I fell in the river because I thought these logs were touching the ground of the water. Is that how you say? But I stepped on those logs, but the logs were floating on the water. So the moment I stepped on the logs, I fell in the water.
So what are you imagining? That the logs are like round and then that much thicker underneath?
I don't know. It was years ago.
River floor?
I don't know. I don't remember. I was heartbreaking at that time because wondering why.
It is true. All the memories are of you kind of like some kind of suffering.
Interesting.
The other one was Zion. Zion was a good trip.
That was a good trip for just like general.
Yeah, but you remember you also got sick when we went hiking through the water.
Oh, remember? Did I get sick or I was just cold?
You were like, I mean, I think both. And then you couldn't do the second hike, remember?
Oh, but we did Angel's Landing, which is just as...
And then you put...
25, 21...
29.
29.
Like, happy 29th
yeah,
birthday.
because it was your 29th birthday.
It was my 29th. And then I think you got married the next year and we never had a trip again after that.
No, the next year... Well, I think one thing to celebrate is even if it wasn't like that yet, which hopefully someday it will be, we went on our first trip together by me going to without kids in Martin Luther King, and we binged so much drama, and I got cheso really bad again, and I threw up again. But I think that shows like what's to come, because a hard season for me, and hopefully just in different ways, a hard seasons for you, it looks like kind of aligned in hopefully moving forward, and that we can embrace what's ahead and also have more trips together. Yep. All right. Well, if you guys want to share your own stories of sisterhood or siblinghood, but you're going to come on the pod again soon, then please let me know if you would like to guest on the podcast. But otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in today and listening to Color Commentary. Bye.